All right, today we're going to tread into some dangerous water. Are the sequels actually bad writing? Let's talk about it. Inflammatory intro aside, I am not going to use terms like good and bad writing in this video because good and bad are subjective. You know, we can have favorite ice cream debates all day long if we want to, but there's no clear winner in that. What I'm going to do instead is try to keep this as academic and scholarly as possible and discuss the forces of magic system and then how different magic systems are used within a narrative to the best effect to make the most satisfying conclusion for the audience, and then how I feel J.J. Abrams dropped the ball in misusing the Force to the detriment of his story and his characters. Now, speaking of satisfying, if you find this video at all satisfying, do all the YouTube stuff, hit the like, comment, subscribe, share, all that good stuff really helps with the algorithm and I appreciate it. And boy, do I hate that stuff. I hate self-promotion. It feels so icky. Anyway, on to the good stuff. First off, big shout out to Brandon Sanderson. This is going to use a lot of his talking points, and I'm going to relate them directly to Star Wars. For those who don't know, Brandon Sanderson's big-time fantasy author. One of the biggest contributions is his discussions about hard and soft magic systems and Sanderson's laws of writing magic systems. Specifically, I want to talk about the first law, which is what this whole argument about misuse of the Force really relates back to. Sanderson's first law is that an author's ability to use magic to solve conflict is directly proportional to the audience's understanding of said magic. I'll explain. There are two major systems of magic. One is a hard magic system, the other a soft magic system. In a hard magic system, the audience is made very aware of the rules and limitations of the magic, and the story exists knowing those rules and limitations. Because you understand that there are clear rules and limitations to the magic, it becomes a tool for the character and for the story. And the story becomes about how to use that magic creatively to solve problems within the limitations that are given to the audience. Okay, a great example of hard magic systems are like superheroes. For the most part, a lot of superheroes have hard magic systems. Like Superman, for example, we know he has super strength, he can fly, he has heat vision, cold breath. We know the powers that he has, we know he's weak to kryptonite, and we build stories around that. Now, obviously, before you rush to the comments to tell me, oh, well, but these rules have been broken many times. They can be. But typically, we always can fall back on these hard rules when it comes to Superman. And they're very important in defining how that magic is used. See a lot of Sanderson's work, the Stormlight Archives, Mistborn, all very hard magic systems. You know the rules, and because you know the rules, you, the audience, are able to allow the characters to solve problems with them because you know there are limitations, you know there are rules, and so the magic works like a hammer, like an axe, like a gun. You understand those limitations. A soft magic system is therefore one where the rules and limitations are not clearly defined for the audience. And this is done on purpose because this magic is meant to inspire awe and wonder. And a great example of this is Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. Gandalf's powers are seemingly limitless. He can do that very vague type of magic that solves whatever problem needs to be solved. And that's intentional. It does exactly what it's supposed to. It's supposed to give you that childlike sense of awe and wonder, and it does. The difference between hard and soft magic systems really is the way that we use them to tell stories, or how we use them within our stories. The old adage goes that hard magic solves problems, soft magic creates problems. Okay, and the way this is because in hard magic systems, you know what the magic can do, and more importantly, what the magic can't do. Because of this, as long as you abide by your own rules, You can use the magic to solve problems because it's just like any other tool. In a soft magic system, we've already asked the reader to, or the audience to accept that the magic can do anything. And because they've accepted that the magic can do anything, if the magic solves your problems, it can feel like a cop-out. It can feel cheap because we already know the magic can do anything. So what we try to do is design situations in which the protagonist has to achieve their goals without the aid of the magic, or at least with the magic not being the primary way of solving their problem. This is why in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf has to be separated from Frodo, because if he's there, then the question always becomes, well, why doesn't Gandalf just use his magic to fix things? And if you separate the two of them, now you got Frodo on his own. We don't have to worry about that extra layer. And so finding ways to limit the way that the magic impacts the story is more important in these soft magic systems. Because there are no rules, if it can solve your problems, well, then why does anything matter? Now, let's relate that back to Star Wars directly. I feel like it's pretty obvious at this point that the Force is a soft magic system. Based on the parameters, based on the explanation, it doesn't have any hard, fast rules for what it can and can't do. Everything is very vague. There are no like levels of training and ability. Like, it's all very intentionally vague to give the Force a sense of wonder and magic. And narratively, it has been used in line with the way that soft magic stories work most satisfyingly, other than, in my opinion, episodes 7 and 9. And that's what I want to talk about. Now, I do want to make two quick caveats before I move on to discuss the way the Force has been used in the story specifically. One is midichlorians. They were kind of an attempt to hybridize, to add a hard element to the magic system. This is also why they don't seem to fit, because they're at odds with the intentionally vague system that is the Force. And all they really do, according to the lore, is dictate how sensitive to the will of the Force you are, and not necessarily dictate your power level, just your affinity for the Force. So based on the fact that they don't really play much into the story, I'm gonna eliminate that. I'm still gonna consider this a fully soft magic system. And then the other thing I want to talk about is any argument that you make in Star Wars can be countered with, it was the will of the Force. Can be countered with, but the Force wanted, or the Force dictated. And that's fine. That is a valid lore explanation. And I am not talking about the lore right now. I'm talking about storytelling and the decisions made within the story and the narrative. So while those are all true, it is all true that the Force kind of wills everything to go the way that it should, but that's not the discussion we're having, and I don't want it to get derailed by having that discussion, if that makes sense. But anyway, let's talk specifically how the Force solves problems, or rather is used in the context of solving problems traditionally, and then how that changes in 7 and 9. Let's talk about conflict resolution in those first 6 Star Wars films and the role of the Force in solving those problems. So we start at the Death Star trench run. There are 2 main problems. One is the 1 in a million shot. 2 is Darth Vader on Luke's trail. Darth Vader is solved by Han Solo coming in. And when it comes to the shot, yes, Luke turns off the guiding system and trusts in the Force, but he makes the 1 in a million shot. Whether or not the Force guided the missiles, whether or not the Force guided him to making the shot, he pulls the trigger, he makes the impossible shot. So narratively, we see Luke make the shot. He gets the credit for that victory, not the magic. Okay? If we had seen like it veer off a little bit and then he like focuses and it veers back the other direction, that would be different. You see how like that would be the magic solving that problem, but instead it's just his skill that appears to solve the problem. Then we go to Return of the Jedi, because we're just going to kind of skip over Empire right now. We'll go back there later. Vader does not turn back to the light because of magic. It's because of his relationship to his son. Palpatine doesn't get tossed down the shaft by magic, it's by Vader. You go back to the prequels, pretty much all of the problems in the prequels are just duels. They're all just fights, but they're resolved by conflict, not by the magic. They're resolved by their ability. Count Dooku says it himself when he says, "This will not be decided by our ability in the Force, but rather our skill with the lightsaber." So in all of those movies, while they have the Force, and the Force can be used in different situations, the main problems are always solved by the characters themselves, not by the Force. Okay? And so that leaves the Force as this feeling of magic and wonder, but it leaves them solving their own problems. And then we get to Episode 7. We start with the infamous Jedi mind trick scene. Now, the first thing I want to make clear is that Rey using a Jedi mind trick with no training does not break the lore. As we have established, this is a soft magic system. The only rule is that there is no rule. We don't have a clear, defined rule about who can use what abilities or how they can have access to them. That is not a problem within the narrative. The problem is we took Rey and we put her in a situation where the only way out was to use the magic actively to solve her problem. Rather than passively like we've seen in the past, she has to use the magic actively, and that is the only thing that she uses to solve that problem. She uses the magic and it solves the problem. And it feels unsatisfying because, as we said, the Force can do anything. The magic is capable of anything. So if it solves your problems, it's like, of course it did. Because of course it could solve it. It doesn't feel like she solved the problem. It feels like the magic solved the problem. It took a more active role in solving that scene than it does previously. And I want to compare this scene specifically to the Wampa cave scene in Empire Strikes Back. This is why we didn't talk about Empire earlier. In that scene, the main conflict of that scene is escaping the Wampa. Now, Luke, just like Rey in Force Awakens, uses the Force in a way that we've never seen it before, in a way that we've never seen him use it before. Really anyone, if we're going in release order timeline. He uses the Force in a new way to get his lightsaber. And that helps solve half of the problem of escaping the Wampa, but it does not solve the full problem. Grabbing the lightsaber with the Force enables him to free himself so that he can defend himself from the Wampa and escape. He has to fight off the Wampa. He has to disarm the Wampa. Pun intended. Not the Force. The Force doesn't do that. The Force gave him his weapon, but he solved the problem. Going back to the mind trick scene, if instead she had used the mind trick, gotten the guard, the stormtrooper, to come over and undo one of her arms, and then when one arm was out, he all of a sudden kind of snaps out of it and is like, "Wait a minute, what have you done?" And then she punches him in the face and then undoes the other arm and is like, "I got to get out of here." That now changes the dynamic of the scene. That now works in exactly the same way as the Wampa scene, where escaping from the guard is the goal, and she uses the magic, but at the end of the day, it's her creativity that gets her out of that scene. And I do you see how one has the Force being the active problem solver, and one has the Force facilitating our character to solve their own problem? And the same sort of issue of the Force taking an active role in solving a problem creeps up again at the Battle at Starkiller Base. So it's not that Rey beats Kylo Ren. That's not a problem. Novices beat masters all the time, okay? It happens. Fights are as much about luck as they are anything else. Add all those mitigating factors that you've heard about. He wasn't trying to kill Rey. He had been shot by the bowcaster. He was bleeding out. All of this stuff is true. So why does it still not feel like a satisfying ending? I genuinely think it's because of the way that the end of the fight happens. So he's holding his lightsaber on her. They're locked in a clash. He tells her, you need someone to teach you, to train you in the ways of the Force. And she says, the Force. And then she opens herself up to the Force, and the fight turns on a dime, and she whoops Kylo Ren. Okay? And that works within the rules. The Force is capable of doing anything. Of course, she can open herself up to the Force and turn the tides on her opponent. That makes sense. But what's happening again is that the Force is taking an active role rather than being just a passive ability in the universe. It seemingly wins her that fight. Like, that's the turning point, is the Force. And that makes it feel like she had less agency in that fight. It feels less satisfying. Imagine instead in that fight, she says, yes, train me. And then he's like, what? And he backs up a little bit, and she kneels down, teach me. And then as he's like letting his guard down for a second, she reaches down, grabs a handful of snow, chucks it up in his eyes, and while he's like dodging with his eyes, she gets up and whoops on him with her lightsaber, and she wins that fight through her ingenuity, her cunning, rather than just the Force willing her to win that fight in that moment. Again, everything works according to the lore, just like in the mind trick scene. It's just not the most satisfying way of doing that. And the same problem creeps up again with Force healing in The Rise of Skywalker. It's not that Force healing breaks the lore. It's not outside the realm of possibility for the Force. The Force can do anything. It's that it only exists within that story to solve the problem of how do we undo Rey's sacrifice? How do we make it so Rey doesn't kill Ben? How do we resurrect them? That's the only reason that the ability exists within the story. And what's really disappointing is we have seen resurrection in Gandalf. We have seen a soft magic system that used resurrection when Gandalf the Grey became Gandalf the White. You can use it to inspire that level of awe and mysticism if the Force had simply willed Rey back to life. But instead, by the way that they did it, they made it an active decision, and it feels cheap. It feels like the only reason that ability exists in the context of the movie is so that they can write themselves out of the corner that they've written themselves into. It's literal Deus Ex Machina in the worst possible way, in my opinion, because it's literally just the gods coming down and saving the day, which you could do in a way that was more satisfying than how they did it within the movie. And the biggest thing that I take away from this whole discussion is I think that the people who suffer the most within the story are the characters themselves. People always say, oh, well, Rey is a Mary Sue, Rey can do anything. I disagree. I think this proves that Rey doesn't do anything. A lot of times what feels like a Rey victory is actually a victory of the Force. And now you can interpret it as a victory of hers, and that's awesome, and I love it. But it's really a victory of the Force. As the narrative tells it, it's a victory of the Force. The Force facilitates her victories rather than her facilitating her own victories. Like, Luke Skywalker does not beat Vader because the Force changes the tides of that battle. He changes the tides of that battle. When Vader calls out Leia, Luke loses it and he takes the fight to Vader and he spanks it. Now, again, you can say, oh, well, but everything is as the Force wills it. The Force made that happen. But we don't see that change. In Return of the Jedi, when Luke beats Vader, as we see it play out in front of us, Luke just takes the fight to Vader and wins. As we see the fight happen on Starkiller Base, Rey is losing the fight. The Force says, nah, you got this, round 2, and she gets a second wind and she beats Kylo Ren. It's the same story, but it's the way that it's told. It's the way the Force is used actively in those scenes that I think most people find so unsatisfying. I just want to reiterate one final time that this is not to shit on the sequels. This is not to say they're bad movies or bad writing. I still really like the sequels. I still really enjoy those movies as much as I enjoy all of Star Wars. I just wanted to use a scholarly academic framework to critique the things that a lot of people critique, because, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And when enough people say, this thing, I didn't like this thing, you have to kind of pause and go, well, why didn't they like it? And yeah, you can say, oh, well, they were all misogynistic, or they were all this, they were all that. And sure, maybe that plays a part in it, but I'd like to think that there might be something else. And I would hope that the reason these thoughts haven't been articulated by other people is probably just due to ignorance. And I don't mean that in a rude way. I mean, if you don't have the tools, the framework, the understanding of these kind of concepts, of the way that narrative functions, it's not in your toolbox to talk about these kind of things. And so my hope is twofold. I hope that the people who dislike the sequels, who say they're bad writing, will be able to add these arguments to their arsenal. Not arguments, but add these points to their arsenal about why they didn't connect with the movie. They didn't feel that these moments were satisfying, and this is why. And that's valid. That's the end of the story. This is the opinion part. Okay? And my other hope is that people who absolutely love the sequels and defend them against anything can understand this perspective a little bit better, so that they can understand it's more than just, I don't like a woman. It's, I would have, if anything, liked to have seen her do more, liked to have seen her accomplish more, have it be her success rather than the success of the Force itself. So, like I said, I just wanted to add some much needed nuance to this discussion. And my hope is that this will lead to more honest, open discussion and more friendly discussion. Because the last thing I want is for this to be levied against either group as ammunition. I don't want this to be like, oh, well, but you just hate Rey, you just hate the sequels. No, I love the sequels. I like Rey. The Last Jedi is my favorite Star Wars movie. I also think, oddly enough, I didn't really mention The Last Jedi because it doesn't fall into these same pitfalls. It doesn't use the Force in that way. You know, like even the Force projection, like, which is the big use of the Force in that movie, the active problem solving is done by Rey and by Poe and everyone escaping Crate. Luke facilitates that with the Force. It's going back to the Wampa scene on Hoth. It's the same sort of thing of the Force facilitates the actions of the heroes. And that is, again, where it works the best. At the end of the day, all is as the Force wills it. They're still here, they're still canon, and before you get too torn up about it, remember, it's all just space wizards and laser swords. So be respectful to each other in the comments, and be respectful to me by doing all the liking, comment, subscribing, and sharing, all the YouTube stuff. Cha-ching! May the space magic be with you. Did I just do an outro? I think I did an outro. Oh shit, the camera's still rolling.
You are now leaving the SK base. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And never forget, the Force will be with you, always.